Hello, everybody. How are you today? In this class, what we're going to do is we are going to talk about the different types of verbs. Here we have the verb to be, modals, auxiliary verbs, and action verbs. So the idea here is to clarify how these different types of verbs work in English and how we can construct sentences using all of these different types of verbs. I have seen in my career as a teacher, a lot of people often mistake verb to be with action verbs, and they don't understand the role of auxiliary verbs, for example. So the purpose of this class is to clarify how these verbs work and how we can construct different sentences using the different rules that guide these verbs. So let's start by talking about the verb to be. That's the first one. I'm sure you've seen it all before. So the verb to be in the present is am, is, and are, or are and is if you prefer. So these are the three conjugations of the verb to be. Now, students often think that the verb to be is I am. Well, that's not entirely correct. Am is the verb. Are is the verb. Is a verb. I, you, he, she, it, we, and they, these are pronouns. Pronouns, not verbs, okay? So, of course, that we associate pronouns with verbs. So, for example, I would say, I am, you are, he, she, and it is. We are, and they are. Well, basically, that's how you would conjugate the verb to be. Now, the second class of verbs in English are the modal verbs, right? Modal verbs are, for example, can, could, would, should, right? And must, and etc., right? These are probably the most popular modal verbs. And I'll talk to you in a minute about the differences between them. We also have auxiliary verbs in English, and as auxiliary verbs, we have do and does, obviously, and did, of course, for the past, right? Did is we use it for the past. We also have will for the future, going to, that's also used for the future, have and has, that we use in the present perfect construction. So these are auxiliary verbs. And well, last but not least, we have action verbs. Action verbs are verbs that represent action, as the name goes. So, for example, work, play, cook, teach, go, right? What else? 90%, 95% of the verbs, I'm going to write this, 95% of the verbs are action verbs, right? As you can see here. So I'm going to talk to you about these different verbs and how they behave in terms of sentence construction. So when we build a sentence in English, how do we operate? How do we work with all these different categories of verbs? Let's start by talking about the verb to be, right? The verb to be, we learned the verb to be ever since we were children in school. As a matter of fact, every year in school, we talk about the verb to be because we forget it. So let's talk a little bit about the verb to be. Well, the verb to be is what we call, when we teach children, we usually say that the verb to be is a strong verb. It is a strong verb because it's a verb that does not need auxiliary verbs. The verb to be works alone. So if I were to, let me create a box here so I can give you some examples. I am a teacher, right? I'm talking about who I am and what I do. I am a teacher. She is my friend, right? You, oops, you are tall. As you can see here, we're using the verb to be, right? Am, is, and are to describe what people are. I'm a teacher, she's my friend, and you are tall. We use the verb to be in these circumstances. We also use the verb to be to talk about locations. For example, I am here in my office. She is at home. We are at the mall, for example. We are at the mall. As you can see here, we're using the verb to be in two different situations. As you know, the verb to be in English has two different meanings. We can use the verb to be to talk about identity, who I am, and we can also use the verb to be to talk about a place that you are, a place that you are in that moment. So here we have, I am here in my office, she is at home, and we are at the mall. Basically, these affirmatives, right, these are all affirmative sentences using the verb to be. Now, the verb to be is a very interesting verb. As I said 5 minutes ago, the verb to be is what we call a strong verb. So the verb to be does not use auxiliary verbs. So the first thing you should know is that if you have the verb to be in your sentence, you are not going to use do, does, did. You're not going to use that for questions or for negatives. So basically, if you had to transform a sentence using the verb to be into a negative statement, you would simply use the word not. Let me change the color here so that you can see that more clearly. So for example, I would simply use the word not immediately after the verb to be. So, for example, I am not a teacher. That's the negative. She is not my friend. And the third one, you are not tall. You see there? Now the next one's here. I am not in my office. She is not at home. And we are not at the mall. So as you can see here, it's very basic and very simple. We did not use any auxiliary verbs. We simply use the word not immediately after the verb. So immediately after am, is, or are. So I am not a teacher. She's not my friend. You are not tall. I am not in my office. She is not at home. We are not at the mall. There's no secret there. Now, when we talk about interrogatives using the verb to be, now there's a little catch, right? So here, when we use interrogative statements using the verb to be, we have to change the position between the verb to be and the pronoun. So it's going to be am I instead of I am. Am I? Are you? Oops, sorry. Are you? Is he? Is she? Correct that. Is she? Is it? Are we? And are they? You see what I did? Basically, all I did here was to change the position between the verb to be and the pronoun. Let me put it in green or blue. Let me put it in blue. I think it's better. So as you can see here, all I did was change the position between the verb to be and the pronoun. And this is how you compose your question using the verb to be. So what's going to happen here is, let me move this text. Hold on, I'm going to move it to the side here so I have a little more space to work on the screen here. So what's going to happen if I have to ask a question using the verb to be? I would say, am I a teacher? Look at it. Am I a teacher? Because I changed the position. Am I a teacher? Here, the same thing. Is she your friend, for example? I'm asking you this question. Is she your friend? Is she your friend? Are you tall? Are you tall? It's a question. Again, important thing, guys, a lot of people forget. You have to use the right intonation, right? It's a question, so you have to make it sound like a question. Are you tall? The next one here, the next example. Am I in the office? See, I'm asking a question. Is she at home? Are we at the mall? You see, I'm asking questions. Oops, I forgot the question mark here. All right, so basically, when you use the verb to be, notice that all you need to do is change the position. Now, one very important thing when you use the verb to be, and this, I can't emphasize this enough, you will never use do, does, or did with the verb to be to ask a question. So you will never say, do I am, or does, is, she, or something like this. Never. The verb to be does not use auxiliary verbs. When you talk about the verb to be, like I said before, it's a strong verb. And because it's a strong verb, all you need to do is change the position for interrogatives, okay? So again, let me show you. Here we have the affirmative form of the verb to be. Here we have the negative form of the verb to be, simply using the word not. And here we have the interrogative form of the verb to be, where we simply change the position between the verb and the pronoun. And that's it. Is that clear? I hope it is, because most people confuse this. So again, do not use auxiliary verbs with the verb to be. If you have a verb to be in your sentence and you have to ask a question or you have to make a negative, you will not say don't or doesn't or do you. No, never. You have to follow the rules that I have highlighted here in this box. Okay, so this is how the verb to be works. It's pretty simple and it's, no catch there. All right, good, excellent. So let me erase this part of the verb to be. Get an eraser and I'm going to erase what we talked about the verb to be. And now I want to talk to you about the modal verbs. Okay, modal verbs behave in a very similar way, right? They are very similar to the verb to be. Again, they are what we call strong verbs. So every time you use one of these modal verbs, you do not use auxiliary verbs. You will not say, I don't can, or I don't should, or I don't, never, never. What you will do is you're going to do the same things we did for the verb to be. So for example, I can swim. She can speak 5 languages. What else? You should go to the doctor. You see here, we have 3 examples. I think these are going to be enough. So here we have the verb can and the verb should that we're using. And basically, these are modal verbs. So if I have to change them into a negative form, all I need to do, again, is to add the word not. So if I have to make a negative, right, I'm just going to use the word not. For example, let me give you an example here. Just a second here. So as an example, I could say that I can't. And can't basically is the verb can plus the word not, right? I can't swim. You see, I can't swim. You do not use auxiliary verbs here. You cannot say I don't can swim or I don't should. Never. If you have modal verbs, follow the same rule of the verb to be. I can't swim. She can't speak English, for example, right? And you should not go to the doctor, whatever. This is a negative. So as you can see, all we do here is for the negative is add the word not. Just like we did for the verb to be, we do the same thing for modal verbs. She can't speak English, you should not go to the doctor. Now, what about interrogatives? If I have an interrogative, what should I do? Put a line here. For interrogatives, you will do exactly the same things we did for the verb to be. So it's going to be, can I help you, for example? Look at this example. Can I help you? What I did, I changed the position between the verb can, the modal verb, and the pronoun. Can I help you? Can she speak English? Again, another question. Should I open the window? Should I open the window? Because I don't know, it's hot or cold. Let me change the color here. I'm going to put a nice shade of blue. Wait. Okay, now let's put a nice shade of blue here. You see, that's how you would ask questions using a modal verb. So, verb to be and the modal verb, I'm going to put a box here, or a circle. I think a circle is better, to show you that these categories of verb, they have a similar behavior. They share a similar behavior when you ask questions and when you have negative constructions. Simply add the word not for negatives, and for questions, you simply change the position between the pronoun and the verb itself. That's it. So, but if I say do, can I help? Does, can, no, you do not use do. You do not use does. Okay? I hope you understand that. That's very, very, very clear. And this is how you should do it. Good. So now let's talk about auxiliary and action verbs because they kind of work together. Auxiliary verbs and action verbs, they kind of work together in the same way. If I'm going to use the verb work, for example, and I have to say, I work in Brazil. I work in Brazil, for example. Or you play soccer. You play soccer very well. Very well. In the verb cook, I could say, for example, I don't know, he cooks very well. He cooks very well. Here I have 3 examples using action verbs, right? I work in Brazil, you play soccer very well, and he cooks very well. Now, when you look at these, you're looking at verbs that we call action verbs. So how do you construct a negative for action verbs? That's when we have auxiliary verbs. Again, when we teach children, we say that action verbs, these verbs here, are not strong enough to make negatives and interrogatives alone. They're not strong. They're not as strong as the verb to be or a modal verb. So they need help. They need auxiliary verbs. That's why you will say for negatives, for example, you're going to say, I don't work in Brazil. And don't basically is do plus not, right? So don't is the contraction of the verb, auxiliary verb do plus the word not. Okay? The second example, you don't play soccer very well. You don't play soccer very well. That's a negative. You don't play soccer very well. And the third one, he doesn't, oh, does not, I could say does not cook very well. You see what I did here? So basically what I'm doing is I am using auxiliary verb do and does in the negative. So don't contracted form of do not, doesn't contracted form of does not. And that's how you do it. Oh, Marcella, if I want to say he does not cook, is that okay? That's okay. No problem at all. Okay? That's how you do the negative in English of action verbs. Oh, but Marcella, if I want to say I am work in Brazil, is that correct? No, that is not correct because it doesn't make sense. I am work. No, you work, right? So it's an important thing. Students often think that because they see the verb to be over and over again, they think that the verb to be needs to be present everywhere. It doesn't. You only use the verb to be when you have verb to be specific constructions. If you're using other action verbs, you don't use the verb to be. You just say the pronoun I and the verb work. You work, he works, and so on and on and on. So that's how these verbs work. Oh, but in the negative, if I want to say I not work, is that correct? I'm going to write here for you. If I want to say I not work, oh, or I not play, oops, sorry, or I or he not go. Let me make it a little bit bigger here. Oh, just a second. Okay, just 1 minute. I have to make this box. There you go. So if I want to say I not work, I not play, he not go, is this correct? No, that is very, very wrong. You know, it's wrong everywhere, everywhere. In terms of grammar, this is very wrong. You need to use, and I'm going to put here, you need to use do, right? See, the auxiliary, or does. You have to do that for action verbs. So it's very important that you remember that, okay? Oh, what about questions, Marcella? If I have a question that I need to ask using action verbs, what do? That's when you're going to use do you or does he. So, for example, do you speak English? I'm sure you've heard this before many times, and maybe you heard it and you didn't know what it was. So, do you speak English? That's how you ask a question. Does he play soccer? That's how you ask a question. Okay? You understand? Do they like to watch TV? I don't know, something like that. So that's why we use do, does, and did sometimes in the beginning of the questions, right? When you have action verbs, you have to use it. Oh, but if I forget to use do, and if I just say, you speak English, people will understand. Of course, people will understand, but in terms of grammar, that is wrong. So the correct way of asking questions is to say, do you speak English in the present? Does he speak English? Okay? I hope you understand that because that's very, very important. One other thing that I like to tell my students is they often ask me, okay, Marcelo, what is the meaning of do? What is the meaning of does? There is no meaning. They mean nothing. There is absolutely zero meaning. The only reason do, does, and did in that case, the only reason they exist is to indicate that you have a question. So when you see do in the beginning of the word, in the beginning of the sentence, when you see do or does before the pronoun, you know that you have a question. Do you understand? See, do you understand? Again, like I said, if you say you understand and you sound like a question, people will understand you. But in terms of grammar, that is very, very wrong. Okay? So that is the basic difference between these different types of verbs. So to recap, verb to be and modal verbs never use auxiliary verbs. So they will never use auxiliaries. So let me erase here some of the things that we are talking about. Okay, so verb to be never uses auxiliary in the present. So you will never say, do you are. Never forget about that. When you have the verb to be, what you will do is change the position if it's a question. And let me write here again, right? I am a doctor. And if it's not, if it's a negative, she is not a teacher. And if it's an interrogative, are you tired, for example? So that's how the verb to be works. Let me erase this thing here. That's how the verb to be works, okay? For modal verbs, we have similar behavior. So modal verbs will follow that behavior. So if I have modal verbs, I am going to say, let me put here, I'm going to say, I can speak English. She can't swim. Can you help me? Right? Look at that. Same formula, very similar to the verb to be, because again, that's what we call strong verbs. Let me put here modals. Oops, sorry, modals. All right. And the last one that we just talked about, for action verbs. I'm going to write here, for action verbs. If it's an affirmative, all we need to do is use the verb. So let me put the text here. I work here, right? If it's a negative, I have to use the auxiliary. So I don't work here. And if it's an interrogative, do you work here? And then question mark, all right? So basically, auxiliary verbs and action verbs, in a way, work together. Of course, there are a few exceptions, but, 99% of the stuff is going to be covered here in this brief explanation, okay? I hope you understand what I just talked about. I hope you understand that there are different types of verbs in English, and these different types of verbs behave in slight different ways. If you have questions, remember, you can just drop a comment or send me a message directly. I'll be happy to help you. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this class, and share it with your friends if you think there's, someone out there who can benefit from this lesson. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.